Hi, everyone. First, I want to make sure your table of contents is filled out. Your name and your period should be at the top, and we have completed or almost completed 4 assignments for this chapter. So there it is right there. Make sure it is filled out. I will check it off. That's where I put your points, and I date stamp it, so I know when you actually finished it. So today we are talking about the scientific method, which is something that you should have gone through in every single science class you've pretty much ever had. So our key concept, science is a way of thinking, questioning, and gathering evidence. And there's a little infographic about the steps of the scientific method that we will be talking about today, although 2 of them are backwards. Process of inquiry, that just means we ask questions about things. It's in our nature to ask questions about everything. But when we put it into an actual method, it's the scientific method. So step 1, scientists make careful observations. We can make 2 kinds of observations. Quantitative observations with an N in the middle are those you can measure with numbers. So I emphasize the N in the middle so you remember the word numbers. So weight, length, height. I am 5 feet 1 inches tall. That is a number. So that is a quantitative observation. Qualitative observations with the L in the middle means you are describing the quality of something, the color or the taste of something. That red box on the bottom right, we don't call that red number 1, 2, 3. We describe what kind of red it is: light red, dark red, maroon, burgundy. Those are qualitative observations. Either way, the way you record observations, we call that data or data. You can say it either way. Step 2 is hypothesis. Scientists ask questions about their observations, about their initial observations, and they form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a potential answer to one of their questions. Another feature of a hypothesis is it must be testable. We must be able to run tests on it, because the next step in the scientific method is to actually test it by performing an experiment. Step 3. So scientists test their hypotheses by performing an experiment. Now, to be an official scientific experiment, there are 3 parts that every science experiment has to have. We call those parts variables. The dependent variable. So to pick out the variables from an experiment, you have to ask certain questions. The first question to ask when reading about an experiment is what is being measured. You should always be able to pick out something that a scientist is measuring, whether it's measuring it qualitatively by describing it or measuring it with actual numbers, like a scale or a meter stick. The part being measured is called the dependent variable, and there can be more than one. We can measure a lot of things about experiments. So we're going to go through an example of picking out a dependent variable. You do not have this slide. That's okay. You do not need to write this slide. This is just the example that we talked about in class. So I'm going to give you an experiment. 2 plants are grown using 2 different types of soil or dirt. A scientist grows both plants for 6 weeks and gives them the same amount of water and sunlight. They measure the height of the plant every week. So like we just said in our slide, what is being measured? And it says right there, they measure the height of the plant every week. So the height of the plant is considered the dependent variable of this experiment. You're going to see questions like this a lot over the next couple weeks, this week and next week. I'm going to give you an experiment and you have to pick out the variables. We're going to do them in your Kahoot. They're going to be on your Check for Understanding quiz, and eventually they will be on your chapter test. The next variable is called the independent variable. We call it IV for short. In science, there are always groups of things being compared or put into categories. The scientist is changing something on purpose to compare one thing to another. The part that the scientist is changing on purpose is called the independent variable. So back to our example, independent variable example. Again, do not write this. You do not need to write this. We're just talking about it. Same experiment. 2 plants are grown using 2 different types of soil or dirt. A scientist grows both plants for 6 weeks, gives them the same amount of water and sunlight. They measure the height of the plant every week. So you have to ask yourself, what is being compared or put into categories? And then it says the two different plants are given two different types of soil or dirt. So the two different types of soil is what we are manipulating on purpose to be able to compare soil A and soil B, which one made the plant grow better. So the two different types of soil is the independent variable of this experiment. And the controlled variable, to remain a fair test of something, only one factor should be manipulated or changed. That was the independent variable that we just talked about. The rest of the factors should all stay the exact same or constant. So the parts of the experiment that will always remain constant or stay the same, they are called controlled variables or simply constants, which is your vocabulary, one of your vocabulary words for this week. And in our example, same example, what stays the same for both plants? It says right there, gives them the same amount of water and sunlight. So yes, water and sunlight are two of the controlled variables in this experiment. There can be more because everything else is supposed to stay the same, but for now, those are the ones that are spelled out in the experiment as staying the same. So moving on from experiment, we gather data, we put it together in graphs and figures. This is the results section. So data from the experiment presented as graphs, tables, or figures. It is accompanied by a simple explanation of what the results are. There are no opinions or interpretations here, only data. So we have our chart. There's a pie chart right here. We use a lot of line graphs. There's bar graphs. There's different kinds of graphs. And then we just spell out in words what is happening in this chart. So this chart is about student grades. 4 people in this class got an A, 12 people got a B, 10 people got a C, 2 people got a D. That's it. That's all we see. Nobody got enough. It's not on there, but we can tell nobody got enough. In the next part, step 5 is the conclusion or discussion section. Scientific journals call it the discussion section, but in classes, we tend to call it the conclusion section. Either way, it's the same thing. This is where interpretations are made and conclusions are drawn about the results. Also, this is where we add a few sentences about why you think the results turned out that way. Obviously, we have no background on this class, but if we did, we could talk about why only 4 people got an A, but nobody failed. Why didn't anybody fail this class? Things like that. Theory is one of the most controversial of the terms we've looked at so far because people don't know how to properly use this word. People don't realize that the scientific meaning of the word is different than its everyday use. People like to just spout off this world. Oh, I got a theory. I've got a theory. I've got a theory. No, you don't. You have a hypothesis. A theory is accepted as scientific fact. And the official definition is official definition. A theory is an explanation of a set of related observations or events based upon proven hypotheses, which means scientists have gone through an experiment, collected all of these results and conclusions, and all of this data, all of this evidence have supported the original hypothesis. And that has to be verified multiple times by separate groups of researchers. One scientist cannot make a theory. It takes hundreds of scientists performing the exact same experiment, coming up with the similar results or the same results, and then the scientific community has to come together and say, okay, there's been enough experimentational evidence. This idea has enough evidence now, we can call it a theory. So finish these notes, leave them in your folder, complete any previous work from last week. You can now finish your vocabulary that has holes in it because you now have all the words and you will see them on your Kahoots this week.